Good morning, Dickinson, and welcome to the first episode of the CSSJ podcast. I'm Jonah Lenahan, class of 2026, and resident early morning Bob Dylan listener. The harmonica's not louder than the rest of the song. Your ears are just soft.
And I'm Leslie Mazzino, class of 2024, resident outdoor cat snatcher. Outdoor cats are free cats, and you can take them home with you.
So, Leslie, good morning. I'd like to start with a question I've had for a little while now. What is our job? And I know there are people in this office who will dismiss that question as pretty silly, but I'm asking straight up because our audience and I deserve to know.
Allow me to read you this incredibly official definition. The CSSJ is the Center for Spirituality and Social Justice, part of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion based out of Landis House. We do a lot of work around religious, secular, and spiritual equity and inclusivity on campus, so we work with all sorts of students to provide access to spaces where they feel welcome and comfortable to explore and express their identities. And oftentimes that comes in the form of our student groups, which we would love to explore on this podcast.
That all sounds great. I love how you were just able to come up with that off the top of your head.
Of course.
You're so clever. Obviously, I know all of that already. It was really for the listeners here, so you're welcome. It seems to me that a big part of my job is writing newsletter articles. If you're not subscribed to the CSSJ newsletter, please try it out. It's a great read every week, especially my weeks.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Which is kind of how we got here. Right, Leslie?
In a way, yes. The CSSJ podcast idea came out of a staff meeting where we talked about outreach for the office, and you said,
what if we made a podcast?
Exactly. And then Molly, one of our coworkers, said,
of course Jonah wants to record a podcast.
And we did, after a great deal of lobbying.
And an incredibly vast collection of 11-point Arial font, bullet point with bold header Google Docs, anxiously produced by yours truly.
And the consent of our director, Dr. Cody Nielsen, we finally got here. This week, I'll be speaking with one of our fellow Landis House employees, Ezra Sunkrant, about anti-theism and how the college environment helps dispel harmful views about religious, secular, and spiritual identities and communities.
But first, we're going to transition to Molly Gunn, reporting from the field. Molly, do you read me?
Loud and clear, Jonah. There will be a bunny break event at the Wellness Center tomorrow, November 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. I asked, and the Wellness Center assured me that no bunnies will be broken at this event. But with the Wellness Center, you just never know. So come by to spend some time with some adorable bunnies and relieve stress. An RSVP is required, so please do so on Engaged. Do not come if you're allergic to bunnies or people that get excited about bunnies. There will also be a blood drive at the Hub Social Hall this Friday, November 17th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., sponsored by Alpha Phi Omega and the American Red Cross. Please consider donating if you're able. And now to this week's interview.
Our guest this week is Ezra Sunkrant, class of 26. She's a religion major and Taoist and one of the student leaders of our religious, secular, and spiritual communities on campus. Welcome to the studio, Ezra.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
So, could you tell me a little bit about your religious, secular, and spiritual identity before and since coming to Dickinson?
Yeah, well, when I first arrived here a little over a year ago now, I was certainly in more of I would say that I was on my way out of being an anti-theist, but I was still definitely somewhat resistant, to put it very lightly, towards religion as a whole. But I also had heard about Taoism through a high school philosophy course that I had taken. And it was through taking a class here during my first semester here that was science fiction, fantasy, and religion. I kind of realized that, religion actually can be a lot more than what I was sort of giving it credit for. And realizing that was really kind of a world-changing thing for me. It was very nice. And nowadays I'd say that I'm kind of an atheist within the strictest sense, as in I don't believe in God per se.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, though, I also consider myself to be a Taoist as well, and within that is sort of a belief within a higher force.
Yeah.
But just not one that is thinking, at least not in my view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I am, at least in terms of the broad strokes. In terms of more minute stuff, just feeling, I don't know, for me, Taoism has been a very amazing thing for me because it's kind of let me sort of let go of a lot of stuff that was causing a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so feeling like I had a place to finally like explore that side of myself was really a freeing thing for me here.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar, anti-theism is not to be confused with atheism. Anti-theism is it's a standpoint against religion. It's not a religious, secular, or spiritual identity. It's a position against those and the belief that religion is bad, harmful, unnecessary. It tends to be a form of anti-religious extremism. And I was also an anti-theist in high school. I had a relatively similar trajectory coming into Dickinson, where I had some negative experiences with religion in high school and a little bit growing up, and it just culminated in me thinking that religion was bad, and same not giving it credit for all the things that it does for people and the ways in which it can be really healthy and really helpful for people. And coming to Dickinson, I also had a class where I was like, oh man, this is totally different from what I thought it was. And yeah, so I identify with that. So how did you find that anti-theism shaped your worldview and your perception of religion, but also people who believe in religion and the way that you sort of interacted with people?
For me personally, I think that at least during that period of my life, because I mean, I still am very young, and I certainly was younger then. And I think that while it was anti-theism influencing my worldview, in many ways it was the specific anti-theist that I was like listening to as well, were like inherently putting everything through that lens and through many more lenses that were kind of like adjacent with it. Because like there was definitely an anti-theist sort of wave back in like the early 2010s, and it definitely carried over through a lot of the 2010s. And that was just basically like through online. I remember really like watching a lot of YouTubers within that world that were like very much like also against general like leftist things, which was like very like strange looking back on that, because like nowadays I consider myself to be definitely some form of a leftist. But it's very strange how those things interact, because then closer to more in my like senior year of high school, when I was kind of on my way out of all that, I started to kind of like see, okay, where can this actually lead to? And I started to find some more niche corners which were still somewhat anti-theist but then leftist as well, and seeing where that would lead to, and seeing how a lot of the time you like will see a lot of those political mindsets of anti-theists start out as like being against Catholics or being against like this group or that group that has like a hold on like history in some way.
Yeah.
And while there's not an excuse to like hate anyone, there's definitely a historical lens which can be like looked through and like can be like seen through like a critical lens. But I like looking back on it, I remember seeing things like that quickly spiral into Islamophobia, into various forms of like very sinister hatred.
Yeah. So did you find that engaging in these anti-theist spaces that was providing you with a sense of community that otherwise, I think people who did believe in religion, who participate in at least organized religious activities, who would have found a sense of community through that? Did you find that this was sort of serving as a replacement to find this community in online spaces?
To a degree, yeah. I think even more so once I started to find myself as someone who is queer as well. And since the queer community at large doesn't have the best history with religion, there has been overlap with those groups sometimes. And so because of that, like I definitely found that there were niche spaces which were queer and also anti-theist, and it was very much something that like was its own ecosystem, because like a lot of time like when we're in like servers online, like that is what it's like. It becomes its own like world. So yeah, I would say that it definitely was a sense of community to a degree. But I don't think it was ever the same sense of community, like not to the same degree for me as what would be expected for a typical religious community.
That makes sense, and I think engaging with people and with spaces and communities online is different than having them right in front of you to your face in many ways. So what was it about, obviously this isn't specific to Dickinson, but what was it about coming to Dickinson that made you break out of that, step out of that? Was there ever sort of a moment where you thought, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that, or I was wrong, or, anything like that?
Well, I think that the pins were already set up by the time that I arrived here. I had this Philosophy 101 elective in my senior year of high school, which had, for the first half, just talked about, quote-unquote, Western philosophy, and for the second half, spoken about Eastern philosophies, but a lot of the Eastern philosophies which we spoke about were also regarded by some as spiritualities or religions as well. And so it was something where I was already starting to have a lot of my ideas about religion is always in the wrong question, because I found myself sort of agreeing with a lot of like the ideas, and I found myself actually living not only was I just agreeing with them, I found myself actually happier when I was like thinking about life in those ways. But it was really once I got here and I had that class that I really was in there because I wanted to take a class that was on science fiction because I'm a super nerd. And once I had been in that class for a little bit and I had started to notice that there were sort of like themes within that class around this idea that science fiction storytelling, fantasy storytelling, and religious storytelling are at their heart very similar. Because a lot of time these are stories that are meant to convey some meaning to whoever is reading them. It's meant to have some theme to it about who are we as a species, what is like the human condition, and that is like the very purpose of religious storytelling sometimes. Realizing that these sci-fi stories that I love so much, that the way that I use them for moral structure in my life, and I still do, the way I use them is the same way that people use religious worldviews and like religious identities and spiritual identities, and realizing that the happiness that I'm getting just from my like silly little like sci-fi stories about like adventures in space and time, that's the same feeling.
Yeah.
Like that sense of like security in actually feeling like I have a way that I can live by, like some forward path, and sort of making that connection, I think was really like, that was like the strike.
Yeah. Do you find that the college environment generally is opposed to being able to hold anti-theist beliefs? Do you think there's something about this environment that can and does force people out of that? Or what do you see about college specifically that helped you get out of that maybe you wouldn't have found somewhere else?
I want to say yes. I wish I could say yes, but I honestly think that a lot of the time that there's a lot of people who go to colleges, and this is honestly just my perception. Take this with like the lightest grain of salt that you can. In my opinion, through like reading a lot of, honestly, too much philosophy. A lot of people in colleges tend to see themselves as like above religion, and thinking that like religion is like something of like the past, and seeing that like religion is like fading away, which is definitely like an anti-theist framework. And it's very interesting how academia has, and this is not all of academia, I don't even think it's a majority, but there is like definitely like a sort of like vocal minority within some corners of academia that do kind of have that view. And because of that, like there is definitely some academics out there, and some, actually I'd say even more so with college students, because a lot of time we do kind of get ahead of ourselves with a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater a lot of the time. And so I think that here we definitely have a very good community that does have a good religious cohabitation, like a very, very strong one. So I'd say that here, yes. I don't know if that's true for all campuses, though.
Yeah, and I do think it's, you can't make a generalization, and this is my personal opinion, so also a grain of salt with it, but I do think that there's something unique about a really small environment and a liberal arts environment that's going to be different from a large campus or large classrooms where you're just one of those people sitting in a lecture hall. You don't know your professor. You don't build the same relationships. And a lot of relationship building relies on working within the circles in which you're already comfortable. I think that the thing that's different about this kind of space that Dickinson offers is you have to be uncomfortable. I think that's a really big thing. That was a big thing for me in breaking out of my own anti-theism, was that I didn't have the choice to stay within bubbles where I was comfortable, because there's only so many people you can make friends with. There's only so many professors you can take classes with. There's only so many classes you can spend not raising your hand. And so I do think that you're right, that it's not wise to make a generalization about other campuses, and that, maybe this is specific to here, or at least this style of campus, where we think about engaging within the academic sphere versus the personal sphere, and how our relationships and our experiences are different, because you come to college to learn. You come to college to be in that academic space. You have to be in that academic space, but where you engage in your social space is entirely on you.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on how we can keep people from falling into anti-theism in the first place, so that we don't have to have this experience of coming out of it? We can make sure earlier on that people understand that religion isn't bad. It's really important to a lot of people. It's done a lot of really good things for the world. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But that it really does help people. It does shape their lives. How do we help people understand that sooner?
I don't have the solution to anything at the end of the day, but...
Right. I mean, we're all, 20-something. We're not going to fix the world.
Yeah. That being said, though, a lot of time, I think that when it comes to larger solutions to problems, my solutions always tend to be something around education. As we're now saying, it's the thing that worked for the both of us. And really getting more people aware of the fact that this is something that can be used in a positive way. This is something that can help people, that religion can be a form of, therapy.
Yeah. And
getting that out there as a light within the world really, I think, is the way to do it.
Yeah. I think it's also rolled up in the idea of addressing online extremism and sort of unchecked online behavior that leads people down these rabbit holes, which is something we see a lot in a lot of different spaces and a lot of different forms of hate. But I think that anti-theism is one of the underlooked ones, because we think about people who fall into Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and other forms of religious hatred. Sometimes that's rooted in religious differences that turn into hate, and sometimes that's rooted in anti-theism. And that I think addressing anti-theism as a root cause of some of that is really important.
And the really ironic thing about that is that a lot of anti-theism comes from observing just half of that.
Yeah.
It comes from the idea that, religion just leads to religious infighting.
Yeah.
And that narrative is sort of a self-fulfilling thing then. The way that you're saying, where it's because the fact that no one is thinking about it of there's this other cause of religious hatred and hatred for religious institutions, it's hard to wrap around is basically what I'm trying to say.
Do you have anything else you would like to discuss?
I'm currently trying to start up a Taoist community here on campus.
The plug.
Yeah, I gotta plug it. But also, it's my main thing that I'm working towards right now, and I'm really excited for it. It's something that has been really important for me as something to achieve. Because I'm an American Taoist, and so because of that, there's not really much of a history there at all. American Taoists have been around since maybe the 70s.
Yeah.
So there's really not much of a set place for me to walk on here. This is a journey that I'm kind of venturing into alone, and so I'm excited for that, honestly. Ironically, I'm kind of just trying to keep myself within the sort of mindset that Taoism tries to encourage throughout this whole thing, which is one about trying to be with the flow about all things. If something doesn't go exactly the way that I wanted it to go, if something doesn't work out, then that's probably just the way it was supposed to happen. And in the end, just accepting that, well, I tried my hardest to make this happen, and the universe said no. I have to just live with that now, and so move on to the next thing and choose to be happy after that, basically. That was thoughts like that were were the thing, like, those were the thoughts that brought me out of a really bad part of my life, like a really awful part of my life. And it was the concepts like that were the ones that really saved me, and this is why this is such an important project to me. Taoism is not going to be the solution for everyone in the world. I don't think there is one. But I do think that Taoism has a very small reach right now, and if I can just sort of increase that reach and get word out about how, hey, there's this sort of way of living life that is very much about put your own happiness first. What is going to make you live a more fulfilling life? Not in a way that's based on, like, oh, how much money are you making? What's your next thing that you're going to get? Like, it's just based around live in the moment, try to be happy, and just go with whatever happens. And to me, that's, like, powerful, and that's really something that has, like, saved me. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
So that Taoist students group will be by students, for students, which is what a lot of our student groups are on campus in religious, secular, and spiritual life. And that will be hopefully starting through the CSSJ very, very soon. So please keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much, Ezra, for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, the CSSJ newsletter is coming out, which means that I have a bone to pick with my coworkers. Welcome, folks, to the newsletter review, my opportunity to shamelessly and facelessly bash my friend's writing while also trying to convince you to read it. In today's newsletter article, student worker Molly the Bazooka Gunn offers up a flagrantly sincere, horrendously good-natured, unrelatably saccharine-flavored piece exploring her love for exercise in the form of a weekly Zumba class. Molly discusses how physical exertion actually provides her with a release and brings more purpose, meaning, and enjoyment to her day. Well, Molly, some of us can't handle being exerted the same way you can. Some of us find sweat and dampness of all kinds deeply disgruntling and unnerving, particularly in an air-conditioned environment. Some of us know that no matter how laid back a Zumba class is, we would end up pulling muscles no humanities major knows they have. It's great that you're getting over your internal shame, but some of us are very self-conscious about the way sweat drips off the end of our nose when we use the electric bike at the gym. Speaking of the gym, Molly, every time I go there, the video screen on the bike keeps showing me pictures of France, and I don't want to see pictures of France, and so then I look up instead of looking at the screen, but then I make eye contact with other people at the gym, Molly, people who are usually biking or running faster than me and sweating less or lifting things and seeming to enjoy themselves. And Molly, I'm just over here thinking, why do my shorts keep getting caught on the bike seat? And I'm tasting sweat in my mouth, and then I want to drink water, but then I slow down and it's hard to get going again. And now the other people are watching me taking massive gulps of water, and I'm embarrassed, Molly, because I don't know if it's a sweat dripping off my chin or if I'm just drooling the water like a baby who hasn't figured out swallowing the whole way. And I just took 6 ludicrous successive swigs from my bottle, which is the size of an artillery shell, and then I can't fit it back into the cup holder. So when I look down and try to jimmy it in there, I have to look at virtual France again, and so I'm even angrier, and now people can hear me jamming my water bottle into the bike thing. And Molly, that is not an uplifting experience. It definitely does not bring me close to God. And when I finally met my goal, I do not feel affirmed, but instead I feel drenched and frustrated, and I can't believe, frankly, that anybody finds physical exercise to be a spiritual and personal joy in their routine. But good for you, Molly. Good for you. It's a terrific article. Everybody check it out. Molly is an excellent writer who deserves your respect and whose compelling thoughts deserve your attention. And Molly, I know you're a French minor, so I'm sorry.
I'm a French major.
I just find France and everything about it so unsettling, and I don't know why. It's like an allergy. Anyway, 4 stars. And with the newsletter written, reviewed, and sent out into the world, we can move on to upcoming events. It seems like the religious and spiritual communities on campus are chugging along at a steady pace with weekly meetings and small gatherings that you can check out in the newsletter and on Engaged. We only have one DEI event for you this week, but we're very excited about it. Leslie.
The LGBTQ Center will be holding their first Queer Book Club meeting this Thursday, November 16th, in Landis House at 5:30 p.m. They will be starting Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, so please read up to Part 4 before the meeting.
And that's it for the week. We'll see you all again soon.
Thank you to everyone who helped us produce the podcast this week, and a special thanks to Ezra Sunkrant again for joining us in the interview.
Thank you, Ezra. We love you. And now, a message from the director of the Center for Spirituality and Social Justice.
Hey, Cody, Leslie's telling me that we need to thank some people.
Yeah. This episode of the CSSJ podcast is made possible by WDCV, Dickinson's #1 radio station, without whom none of this would have been possible. The CSSJ podcast is a production of the Center for Spirituality and Social Justice at Dickinson College. Musical intro and transitions are produced by Leslie Mazzino. Hosting this week were Jonah, I Still Think Luther is Cool, Lenahan, and Leslie, I'm Not Sure About Moving Back to Chicago, Mazzino. Special thanks to Ann Maitland, Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion admin, for hyping the staff out while I wasn't ready to do so, and to Alice Arja Hall for sitting through Jonah's monologues at staff meetings. Special thanks to Katerina for lending her creepy whisper into the intro, Ezra Sonkrat for an excellent interview that boosted the professionalism of this thing by 1,000%, and Molly Gunn for her generosity and generally good attitude. And finally, we'd like to thank listeners like you for supporting the CSSJ podcast for all of one episode. I still can't believe I'm letting you do this.
Thanks, Cody. From Landa's house to your house, have a great week.
Okay, one last thing, Cody. What's God's favorite Pixar movie?
I don't know. That's not a recording.